what do we say? What do our children say to us when they're going to bed at night? Tell me a story. Story is in our bones. It's in our DNA, our starvation for story. Mm-hmm. And God spoke and story happened. Right. And He communicated His truth to us in story.
Welcome to Bible Connection, the podcast where we talk about the Bible and how it connects to every facet of life imaginable.
Hi, I'm Nikki Getman, and welcome to Bible Connection. I get to lead Thomas Nelson Bibles in marketing, and when we conceived this program, we wanted to talk to a whole range of people about how the Bible connects to their work and their calling. And today, I'm so pleased to introduce you to Brian Bird, who is a TV and movie producer and screenwriter, and he's done a lot of really interesting projects over the years, some that I'm sure you're really familiar with. But today we're going to talk about how he got started, what his mission is, his calling, and how does the Bible fit into that calling and the purpose of your life and what it means to be a Jesus follower in Hollywood. So with that, let's kind of jump in. So how did you get started with the movie business?
Well, thank you for having me with Bible Connection today, Nikki. It's a pleasure, and it's fun to see you again after many experiences over the years of intersecting with some of the projects that we've been involved in. How did I get started? Well, my grandfather was a pastor. My father was a pastor for a time, so I grew up in the church as a consumer of church, as a kid, and as a follower of Christ at a young age. But my father left the ministry to become a radio DJ, and so most of my growing up years, my dad was on the radio, playing music and news and so forth, and so I sort of grew up with media and ministry in my bones, and as a consumer of both church and media, as a young person, I just always had a fascination with story. It was really the only thing I was any good at. I'm pretty average in almost everything. And but I had a little bit of a facility for story, and I didn't really know that I would end up in film, or television at that point. But I did have a strong sense that story was important to the world and to human beings. And so I went to journalism school and became a newspaper reporter and a magazine, writer initially in my career as not necessarily a storyteller, but a story purveyor, telling true stories or, writing about the news and events of the day. And my wife Patty, her great uncle was a TV and film writer and producer going back to the golden age of TV. Don Ingalls was his name. And Don, wrote for all the great westerns, Bonanza and Have Gun Will Travel, and The Rifleman, and The Big Valley, and even Star Trek, in the early days. And so he had this big career, and my wife cornered him at a family gathering and said, "Hey, Uncle Don, you should read my husband's, journalism, his clips from, newspaper magazines." And, whether Don was, guilted into it or just a good guy, and it was probably a little bit of both. He said, "Sure, I'll read your husband's stuff, Brian's stuff." And he had been a journalist too at the beginning of his career, so we had that in common. And he read my stuff, and he goes, "Have you ever considered TV or film writing?" I said, not as a writer, but as a consumer. I just eat story, all the time. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Well, you should. You're a good writer." He gave me some scripts and some sort of seminal books that all screenwriters have in their libraries. And I wrote a spec script back when I was 24, I think. And Don at that time was producing a show that all y'all are too young to remember, but it was called Fantasy Island, and it was on ABC. It was a big hit. Yeah. And he gave me some samples, some scripts from the show. And so I looked at the format and I wrote this spec script for Fantasy Island and gave it to him. And he said, it's really good. We can't use this, but you have skills. And he said, if we get picked up for an 8th season, I want to get you in the room and have you pitch some ideas, and we can see if maybe you could do a freelance episode. Good to his word. The show got picked up, and he brought me in, and I met, and I didn't know what I was doing. I had to leave the newspaper to go do this.
Right.
And I brought 4 ideas. I had watched the show and understood sort of the format, and brought this idea in, and they said, we haven't done anything like that one. We like that one. Who's your agent? And I said, my wife. I don't know. And so Don got his agent to represent me, as just as a freelancer. And I'm 25 years old, and I have my first national network writing credit for a teleplay on a TV show, on a 25-inch color tube television, which we thought was really big at the time. Right. And so I get my 1 cup of coffee in the big leagues, right? And I'm pretty young, and I made more money doing that one episode than I did all year at the newspaper. And it wasn't necessarily just about the money, but when you're young and you have 1 child already, and that's pretty tantalizing. And so I continued my journalism work, but I kept my drive to do this. And a few years later, I had landed my first job on a staff job on a TV show, and kind of have never looked back. That was 1989-90 season, and it was a show called The Family Man on CBS, and I wrote that as a staff writer, as a story editor that first year. And I have written and or produced closing on 400 episodes of TV now, all these years later, and a couple of dozen movies, maybe a few more than that. And it's all I know how to do now. And it's interesting because I still consider what I do journalism in a very odd way. And some of it's fiction. Some of it is, I tell true stories also. I love adapting true stories for film and television as well. And but I'm world building, right? And that requires homework. That requires a journalistic sense of the world and of collecting facts and understanding the world and how people tick. And so I still attack it like I'm a journalist. And I love that because while some of it, yes, is sort of pure fiction, some of it is based on experience, right? Or my sense of the world, or my experience with other people and learning how they work and how they tick. And so in a way, all story has truth, right? Even fiction is coming from a place of truth. It comes from human experience. So that's kind of how I got my start.
It's so interesting because what's become your life's work, and that I think you would agree is missional to you, right? Yeah. Really started with something so practical as a decision, like you had an opportunity, you pursued the opportunity. It wasn't like there was a big sign on it that said, God is here and you're going to do a show for Fantasy Island, which we can agree is probably not a religious show.
No, not at all.
I remember Fantasy Island, right?
Yeah.
Came on after Love Boat.
Yes,
right?
you do remember, yes.
Yeah. I couldn't watch Fantasy Island. I was this big and it was too scary for me.
Too scary, yes.
But yes.
Yeah, 100%. I'm a church kid who gets this opportunity. But I always had a sense of mission about it, a sense that story was really comes out of creation, right? Out of the creation story. And the other thing that about that episode of Fantasy Island, which was kind of an epiphany, became an epiphany or a theophany for me, is that it was a one-off, right? It was one episode,
Right.
And in the scope of the universe, a pretty tiny accomplishment,
Right.
But 3 years later, and I was still working on, trying to break in on a more full-time way, but I was still doing journalism work. And 3 years later, I was working on a magazine cover story for World Vision magazine in Ethiopia on the famine. It was the big famine was in the mid 80s. This was like 88. And it was what's happening now. It was an update on the famine, the big famine there. And I was in the hotel room, the Hilton Hotel in Addis Ababa, on this journalistic pursuit while I was there, and flipping through the TV dial. And what do I see? Not just Fantasy Island, but my episode. 3 years later. And in those 3 years, I had gotten some perspective on, okay, it was cool, but, it's not like changing the universe.
Right.
But when I saw my episode of Fantasy Island with Amharic subtitles in Ethiopia, I got chill bumps. I mean, it was like this sense of, if God can use something that small, or if the world is going to take something that small and it gets spread all over the world, then the reverse of that has to be true. The opportunity for life and faith affirming story and content is out there, right? And for better or worse, media has become the biggest conversation. I would like to say the Bible is the biggest conversation,
Right.
but sadly, it's not. The media has become the entertainment and the media saturation 24/7. We're watching on our phones even, right? We're consuming this content all day long, 24/7, 365. That's the biggest conversation in the world right now. So if that's where the conversation is, my sense even back then in 1989 was the opportunity for uplifting faith and hope and redemptive storytelling is huge. And if this is the new Gutenberg press, right, which was invented to make the Bible for the masses, if the media and film and TV and digital, YouTube and social media, if that's the new Gutenberg press, we got to use that. You guys are using that, right?
Right.
So we absolutely, if it's the biggest conversation, we need to be in that conversation, not in our own little bubble, having our own little talk, our own little echo chamber where we're talking to ourselves. We need to take this, the greatest story ever told, right, into that conversation,
Right.
and make sure that everybody has a chance to hear it. And so from that point on, that theophany I had of like Fantasy Island, okay, well, that's kind of, trivial in the scope of things, but it was being exported all over the world. So why can't other things be exported? And I got down my hands and knees in that hotel room and I said, God, if you want me in that game, then you open the door. And it was a year later that I was on my first show. And 10 years later that I was writing and producing for a show called Touched by an Angel, which at its peak was in close to 200 countries. As a faithful but secular piece of entertainment, distributed by secular companies. So that's huge, right? When you have that way to compare things and you have that benchmark or memorial stones. That was a memorial stone in that hotel room for me.
Are you hungry to experience life-giving communion with God? The Abide Bible, developed by the Taylor University Center for Scripture Engagement, brings a variety of tools to your fingertips to help you encounter the voice and presence of God. The Abide Bible invites you to pattern your prayers after biblical texts, praying God's Word back to Him. Imagine what's happening in the biblical narrative as if you were a bystander. Focus and reflect on Scripture and its meaning for your life through journaling. Deeply ponder a passage of Scripture to fully experience its impact. And consider a classic piece of art, a photograph, sculpture, or painting, and use it to deepen your understanding of Scripture's truths. Start your Abide Bible experience today with a free 21-day video series through the book of John. Go to abideseries.com now and change the way you read the Bible.
Right. And it's so interesting because you had no idea back in the late 80s, early 90s that we would have the dissemination of media that we have today, and that you would need all of those skills and experiences to be prepared for this proliferation that we have today.
Right. And today, and this was, that epiphany was the late 80s.
Right.
We're 30 years later.
Right.
Right. And the proliferation is so massive.
Right.
Now, there are over, just in the US, 1,000 television shows being made, original television shows.
Like right now today.
Yes. And multiply that by several times over when you talk about the world, media consumption. And we're all partaking in consuming content from all over the place now. We watch Netflix or any of the streaming platforms, and we're seeing shows from Finland and Norway and, Israel and all of that, dramas and good content. I mean, it's very well made. And much of it is cynical. Absolutely, it might be well made, but it's dripping with cynicism and sort of a, completely secular worldview, which is what those folks, that's how they're wired, right?
It's their context.
That's their context. Right. That's how they've been raised. It's all they know. And they give us back what they know. Well, we should do that too, right? And I really feel that sense of call to do that. I don't feel any more special than anybody else. I'm supposed to do this, right?
Was there ever a point where you questioned that calling?
Yeah, there's a couple spots. When I was in journalism school, I'd been raised in the church, and we can't inherit our faith, right? We all have to, as adults, we can absorb everything as we're growing up that our parents and our context give us, but you still have to choose on your own. And so I went through a bit of a existential crisis in college and secular journalism school, where I'm being confronted with the marketplace of ideas, and was going, how do I make this fit with who I've been raised to be and who I've grown up to be? And I talked to a professor, a journalism professor, who I did not know was a person of faith, was a believer in Jesus. And I just said, I'm trying to put all the pieces together and I'm trying to make this all fit. And he said to me, he said something very powerful. He said, in the marketplace of ideas, truth is always going to rise to the top anyway. So don't be afraid of the marketplace. And I, growing up in church and in the Christian context, there's a lot of believers who are afraid of the marketplace. They're afraid of the marketplace of ideas. We shouldn't be. God wasn't. He put up with all kinds of existential doubt in the Bible, right? All kinds of questions and panic and existential crises that people were having. And he wasn't afraid of the questions. So we shouldn't be afraid of the questions either. We should be open to other people's discussions and quietly present our truth in the midst of that. And if it's going to work, it's going to work, right? And that's God's business. Our business, our responsibility is just to be who we're supposed to be, share our conviction, not with a hammer, but with truth and love, and be wise as serpents and gentle as doves, and present our truth. God can then do what He wants. So that was one time when I questioned, like, okay, what do I do here? There was another time when I was working on a family comedy called Step by Step, and I loved the work, and I learned how to write comedy. Who knew I could ever do that? But I remember driving into Warner Brothers, the studio, to go to work one morning, and I was reading Bob Buford's book, Halftime, at the time, and he had presented this question in the book, which is, what do you want on your epitaph? What do you want written on your headstone when you die? And I'd never really thought of that before. And I remember thinking, I'm writing dumb jokes for this family comedy. How is that anywhere remotely connected to this sense of missional sense that I had kind of really in my whole life? And I said, okay, God, what do you want on mine? And I got and I get soul impressions, not that often, but every once in a while, deep soul impression. And, the message I got was His words moved people closer to God. And if that's what people remember me for or by, good enough, right? And years later, Rick Warren was my pastor for 25 years, Saddleback Church, purpose-driven life guy. And and I asked him about that, that whole quandary that I was having, and I said, I'm not presenting the plan of salvation in this work, really. I mean, I'm not, handing people a gospel track at the end of the day. And he goes, Brian, that's not, you're not looking at this the right way. He said, if all you do is ask great questions and stir up soul cravings, you will drive people to my door. I'll do the rest. But he said, what you're doing is harder than what I have to do. Right? Because the walls that have been erected in our culture by the media, by news, by politicians, by the great divide that we all feel, those walls are keeping people from getting there. But we can carve up the soil. We can plant the seeds. We can put stories in the ground and get people to Rick's door, right? And he said, if that's all you do, that's massive. Because I can't do that. I can't do all that cultural warrior stuff. You got to do that. And that was a deeply powerful insight that I got from that. And it was permission. It was permission to be dangerous, right? With faith. Permission to be dangerous with the truth. To be bold. To tell people what they need. Not just give them what they want, but to tell them and give them what they need.
Right. And since then you've done, you did the movie Captive, which was in theaters. You did Case for Christ with our friend Lee Strobel.
Yes.
And I actually saw him in the office 5 years ago when the movie was coming out. And I was fairly new to the company at the time, and I went up to him and I said, "I know Brian." And he's like, and he said, "I told the people who are making it the only screenwriter I want is Brian Bird. That's who they have to work with."
No, and I love him for that, and I'm so honored and proud to have been there for that. And I write my own dialogue, obviously, because I'm making myself cry. I'm so proud of that movie.
Yeah.
I really am. And the stories that we hear, that Lee shares and that we hear through the grapevine about the change that it gets made
Right.
in people that see that film. And it's maybe the most evangelical film
It says Christ in it. Case for Christ.
in the title.
Right?
Yeah, and it's given that it's a bestseller,
Yes.
New York Times bestseller, it's
Yeah.
kind of hard to leave that branding behind,
Yes, yeah.
even for a movie. But yeah, I was really happy with how that came out, and loved my friendship with Lee.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I want to do more of his books. We
Yeah.
want to try to figure out how to do that.
Yeah. And now you've had 10 seasons of When Called to Heart
Yes.
on the Hallmark Channel, which you and I have talked before, and you've talked about, stories. We have a hungry culture,
Yeah.
a culture that is hungry for real food.
Yes.
And what does that mean to you when you have the ability, I guess, to reach people that may not ever walk through a church door?
Yeah. When Calls the Heart, as an example, tomorrow, I don't know when this will be airing, but
Not tomorrow,
not
but
tomorrow,
yeah.
but this week we are wrapping up season 10 of that show. We will have hit 110 episodes of that show that Michael Landon and I, Jr. and I, created together and gave birth to, and executive produce together. And we had no idea. We had no idea that this thing was going to fly. But the author, Jeanette Oak, who, of the original book series for When Calls the Heart, always told us, she said, there are people that I will never, ever be able to meet, right, in the world and, other countries and so forth. I mean, life's too short to meet everybody, who you might touch. And she said, my books are my paper missionaries. And I just love that idea. And so our movies, When Calls the Heart, those 110 episodes, by the way, Michael's dad did 209 episodes of Little House on the Prairie. I was involved for many seasons with, a couple hundred episodes of Touched by an Angel. They're digital missionaries. And on the internet, they go farther than books, I'm sad to say, right? They can go viral. They can get to anybody. They can be hacked. They can be pirated. Fine, right? You want to take our content and steal it? We win because you're watching it, right? So that's amazing to me. The just what's happened with the digital revolution, and what I said to you earlier about story. Somehow, as a kid, like my mom found a picture that I wrote in second grade, and it was a picture of like TV cameras. I have it on my wall in my office, and I said, when I grow up, I'm gonna make movie and TV shows. And I honestly didn't remember doing that until she pulled it out of the box of stuff when I was an adult. And it was sort of another memorial stone for me, And over the years, I've had these epiphanies or these theophanies about story and the importance of story. And one of them came in the early 2000s when I was writing on Touched by an Angel. And I was writing an episode of the show, and in the world of television, there's no such thing as writer's block. It's not allowed. It's not even, it's called being fired. You don't get to say, hey, I need more time, or, the writer's struggling, so we'll just hang out and wait. The clock is ticking and everybody's collecting a paycheck. That just doesn't fly. So I was feeling this sense of pressure, and I had written myself into a tributary of the Amazon River, figuratively, and I couldn't find my way back to the main channel on this script. And I was starting to feel desperation, and I was feeling the imposter syndrome hit. These self-tapes were playing. How did you trick them into letting you into this business? You're just a fake, you're an imposter.
Right.
And I just prayed. I said, God, what do I do? Please help me. What do I do? And again, no words appeared on my computer screen. I didn't hear an audible voice from heaven, but I got another soul impression. And that soul impression was, I was a writer. Now you be one.
Wow.
And I got another case of chill bumps there, because it was like, wait, what does that mean?
Right.
And all of a sudden, these verses began to flood back to me, from my growing up years and my time as a Christian. And, in the beginning was the Word. Not written on tablets of stone, but on hearts of flesh. Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. God, the author of the universe. And then it occurred to me, how did God leave his revelation to us? In a big fat novel.
Right.
Right? A big fat narrative.
Right.
His story.
Right.
History. This narrative running through space and time, across the cosmos, across all of time. And we're all characters in it, in that novel, right? And so are all those other great people of faith and non-faith and doubt and all of that. And then I realized what do we say, what do our children say to us when they're going to bed at night? Tell me a story.
Right.
What? So they're stalling because they don't want to go to sleep. That's part of it.
Right.
But they're starved.
Right.
We're starved for story.
Right.
His story.
Right.
Right. So story is in the DNA.
Yeah.
It's in DNA. What are the cave paintings? In the prehistoric cave paintings, I believe this is what they are. The cave children saying, tell me a story. Around the fire, we're going to bed, tell me a story. So here's Dad cutting his thumb open and putting blood on the wall and making figurines and caricatures. Right? Tell me a story. Story is in our bones. It's in our DNA, our starvation for story. And God spoke and story happened.
Right.
And he communicated his truth to us in story. All throughout history, the myths of mankind all have the same story. They all have the hero's story. They all have the hero's journey in them, right? What's one stage of the hero's journey? One of the stages of the 12 stages is the resurrection.
Right.
That's in every myth in mankind.
Right.
We are wired for resurrection.
Right.
That was before Jesus. Gilgamesh, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, he was resurrected. This is in our bones. It's in our DNA. We are wired for that story, no matter where we go, right? No matter what time we come from, what land we come from, what period of history, we are wired for that story. C.S. Lewis said, Jesus is the myth that became true, right? Think about that. This is how stories are told all through history. Every story is a faith-based story. If it has a resurrection in it, And almost every story you can watch, movies, TV, have some version of a resurrection, a literal or figurative resurrection of a dream or of a love or of a job or whatever, or an actual resurrection like E.T. or Harry Potter or Neo in Matrix, because men are starved for resurrection. We get to tell those stories. That's amazing to me. It's just huge. And it all comes from that Bible.
Right.
Right? It all comes from that giant narrative through space and time. And I get to be that. I get to be a little cog in that.
Right.
That system, that communication system. And after that epiphany that I had, I just wrote. And I just said, and I still have on my computer, I have to replace them because the stickum wears off. Be God's typist. Dictate. All right. Dictate. I'll do whatever you tell me. And I've never, that was early 2000, I've never had another case of writer's block. Doesn't mean it all comes out like gold butter, out of my fingertips or my brain or whatever. It can always be better. We can always improve on it. But when it comes out, it's breathed. Not me. It's not me.
This is Bible Connection, and you've spent a lifetime growing up in the church, reading the Bible, exercising your faith. But what's new to you today?
What's new to me is the new epiphanies, the new theophanies that come. And because of this paradigm that sort of has evolved over the course of my 35 years of doing this now, the paradigm is renewed for me. This story is food paradigm is renewed for me. The wiser, the more mature I get, the more, I probe the Bible and find new examples of that. I came across this passage in Ezekiel. He ate the scroll. And then I came across it in Jeremiah. And then I came across it in Revelations. John ate the scroll. Jeremiah ate the scroll. Ate the scroll, they literally took the goatskin manuscript and chewed it. All right? Story is food. God's story is food. It's the cure for everything in the universe. It's this giant love story from heaven to earth is the only thing that fixes anything. Politics won't fix it. Activism won't fix it. Protesting in the streets won't fix it. This giant love story of impossible forgiveness is the only thing that will fix anything in our culture, in our world. And it's the opposite of it is the result of the biggest blood feud in history, which divides hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, right? The inability to forgive, right? Eye for an eye that doesn't get resolved in, you've heard it said, love your enemy. And it's sitting there for us. It's sitting there for the whole world. It's been here for 2,000 years. And in some ways I despair because it's farther away than ever from, it's sitting there, but the embrace of it, it's like we're blind. We're blind to it. Eye for an eye has blinded us. right? So it's this giant love story that is food for our souls, that's available right now to everybody. And what's new for me constantly is I get to keep telling put that same love story, that same cure for everything in the universe in a new wineskin. And I'll just keep doing that. It's all I know how to do. I'd be horrible at anything else. So I'm just going to keep doing it. And they can't stop me, right? And I know better than them, right? I know that they need it. So I'll just keep giving it. And I'm gonna, it's precious cargo. This giant love story is precious cargo. It's the most precious cargo in the universe. It has to be smuggled in, right? Because the walls have been built up against it, and so we have to sneak it in. We have to Trojan horse it in, and so that's kind of for me what's new. It's of course I want all the revelation I can get, from Scripture to enlighten me and to make me wiser and a better person. But boy, when I land on something new, like he ate the scroll, and I realized that Scripture is food, it's literal food and soul food, it's medicine. It's medicine for what ails the culture. So got to just keep dumping it in the water, wherever we can. And that's what's new for me each day. How do I put this food into the culture?
Salt and light.
Yeah. Yeah, but not too salty because it's nasty tasting.
Well, there's that too. Brian, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Good. Well, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for letting me share my heart, and hope it's, helpful for others.
I believe so. Thank
Good.
you.